So you've got the gear, you don't know where to put it. Sorry, little thing. If you don't know about HomeLabs yet, go check out some of my other videos. We're talking about the fun stuff, which is making your HomeLab buzz, making it look nice, making it just, when somebody looks at it, they go, man, that's a really cool looking HomeLab, right? But also, we'll talk about where do you put your HomeLab? Do you put it on the floor? Do you rack it up in your ceiling, in your roof? Do you put it against a wall? Do you put it in the garage? Do you put it inside of a closet? Where does a HomeLab live? Is it inside of a rack? Is it not in a rack? How do you cable the thing? Do you use blue cables, yellow cables? Are the cables neat? Do you do labeling? Does the thing gonna look nice? And if you're a tech geek, why is geek or nerd like a bad thing? I actually like the badge of being an IT geek. And when I have my friends or family come around and I show them my HomeLab, they go, hey, that looks really cool. And that's because I spent the time making it look pretty. Because I work in the tech industry as well, when I go into a comms room, into a server room, into a data center, and I look at some of the racks and how the things have been set up, I lose my marbles when I see them jumbles, like spaghetti mess, cables everywhere. Don't do that. Don't do that. I mean, you want to later on, you want to trace cables. You want to make sure that you're able to know where point A to point B, where does it go without having to, it's just a mess, So subscribe, click on the button on the bell so you don't miss out on anything as well. Now, where are you going to put this lab? This is something that you're going to have to figure out because it may be in the way. It may be noisy. You may not want people to see it. I could find a really nice corner of my house or corner of the office and just stick all that stuff on the floor and power it up. But longer term, that's not going to be the best viable option because it is going to get hot and it's not good practice either to stick the equipment on top of each other. How often is your lab going to be turned on? Because just because you've built a lab and it's running server software, the question is, do you always need that running? Do you always need to be able to access the equipment in your lab? If the answer is yes, well, then you've got to find yourself an appropriate spot to store and house all of this equipment. I love technology, so I actually love seeing that equipment out. I love just seeing it, right? But your friends, your family, you've got visitors coming around. They may not like, or it may look messy to them, all of this equipment. And especially once you cable it all up with network cables and power, it may just get out of control. So, hey, maybe other people don't like to see that sort of stuff. So you just got to be aware of that and the location where you're going to be building it. In my case, I've actually gone and invested in what's called a server rack. I actually want to house all of my equipment in a rack itself. Now, in a corporate environment, you're going to have very, very tall, taller than you generally, server racks. But in a home lab, you may not want to go for something that big. You could if you want to. Hey, great. If you wanted to build a massive lab, you could go for something really, really big. Or you can build yourself a smaller version and buy a smaller rack. Now, in my case, I went and purchased this one on eBay. It was not very expensive. I think I paid like $120 Australian, which is, let's say, $100 US. You could go and buy yourself a brand new one, but of course they are pretty expensive, and especially the sort of rack that you are going to get. If you are wanting to go down that route, there are racks with proper cooling, with fans, with PDUs or power distribution units, power, cable management, all of this sort of stuff. There's big ones, there's small ones, there's taller ones, there's deeper ones. So really do a bit of research into the sort of rack that you want to go for, if that's what you want to do, because they can get quite expensive if they are brand new, but you could find yourself a bargain if they are quite cheap. I've got a whole bunch of equipment that I use for two main reasons. So yes, it is a home lab that I'm using for my own learning. Equipment that is semi-modern and that can run the latest server software so that I can install it, play with it, and make sure that I'm still up to date with technology. The second main area is just that I can host stuff for the rest of my home network. Now, I've got a lot of TVs, I've got smart devices, I'm using lots of gaming consoles and smart lights and smart cooling and heating. I've got cameras around my place, all of that. So I also want to manage all of that in some sort of a centralized location. So that's why I also have some of my equipment that is production. It's not necessarily part of the lab in the same way that it's for learning, but I'm actually using it for two purposes: for learning, but also to house these things that I'm running at home. I wanted everything to be in a properly housed environment, such as a rack, and then I could put shelves in there, I could put proper fans and cooling, make sure that it's super easy to transport. That's the other benefit of the rack as well. If I want to move it from one side of my room to another, or relocate it to another room altogether, or relocate it to another house or a different office, I just pick up the whole thing, stick it into a truck, or just wheel it over, because this rack has also got wheels on the bottom, which makes it super easy. And then that way I don't have to unplug everything and remember where everything is. I can just pick the whole thing up and just move it. And that just makes my life a lot easier. So I didn't go for a tall one because it would just been annoying. It just would have been too big, and I'm not planning on building my rack to that extent. And of course I've got a little key on the right where I can easily open and shut that door on my rack. The two sides of the rack, so the left and the right, is just a simple panel that I can open up quite easily. There's nothing to this. I can literally open up and have access to the sides. And the reason I may want to do this is once I actually put equipment into my rack itself, it sometimes may be hard to organize all of your cable management or move things from the back to the front. So for example, I've got some switches. Well, the switches face forward, which means all the cabling is going to be plugged in on the front, while my servers and storage, well, they're plugged in on the back. So I'm going to need to route some cables around. So if I've got access to the side panels and I can actually open up the side panels of my rack, then I can easily just trace, feed through my cables that way. And then of course the back, I've got access to all of the stuff that I need to on the back. Now in this particular room, I do have some good air conditioning, because in a real life production environment, if you're going to be working in a real life company, you're going to find that generally a server room, a comms room, a data center are kept quite cool. And that is intentional because you want to make sure that your equipment is kept cool. Now, some people like to put a rack or their home lab inside of a garage. And that may sound like a great idea because it's away from everything. Sure, that may be fine, but if you live in an area that gets super hot and that garage gets super hot, just be aware. Now with most racks, there's a whole bunch of accessories that you can buy for the rack. You're gonna go and design this the way that you want to design it. All right, you're gonna be building this not the way that I've built it. You can get some of my tips and some of my techniques and follow some of those, but you go and customize it and build it yourself. And that's the beauty about building your own home lab. You build it to the specs, to the setup that you want. But what I have gone and done is I've actually gone and bought myself some server trays. These are some trays where I can actually stick equipment onto it. Because when you are going to be racking all your equipment, yes, you can stick things on top of each other. So I could put a SAN down the very, very bottom and then just stick my rack-based server or other things just on top of it. And that generally will be okay. If you're going to be running it pretty regularly, if your equipment's all going to be turned on, things can get quite hot. And there's not going to be any ventilation from the top of one of the units to the bottom of the next unit to the bottom and the top of the next unit. So things can get quite hot quite quickly. Now, if you are going to be considering purchasing some rack equipment, let's say you want to go buy yourself an old server, yeah, you can go and buy yourself some long trays and stick the server on top of a tray, but it's even better if you find yourself a server that has some rails already come with it. Now, when you buy a brand new server, let's say I go down to my local PC store, well, not really PC store, but let's say I go and buy a Dell EMC. So that server is shipped to me, I open it up. Well, inside of that box is going to be not only the server, but the rails inside of that. You'll see at the front and on the back, there's actually areas where you can click in or screw in the rails that come with your equipment, and then you can literally attach that to the sides of your server, to the sides of your storage, to the sides of your switches, whatever it may be, and then they slot right into place. So that makes it a lot neater and a lot cleaner as well. But if you don't have those rails, then maybe look at getting yourself some trays that are big enough to be able to store and sit that equipment onto it. So I did mention fans. Not every single rack will come with fans. Some will, some you can install yourself. But the more important thing is making sure that the space, the room itself, where your rack is housed, that is overall generally kept cool. Now you can get really, really fancy with certain racks where they're completely enclosed, completely closed off, and there are funnels at the very top of the racks funneling the hot air out. And that's actually really, really cool. If you're wanting to go really, really fancy, that's what you could do. A lot of corporate environments will have that. Now, something else just to be aware of, you're not going to do this in a home lab, but in corporate environments, you've generally got hot and cold aisles. So let's say you've got multiple cabinets, the cold areas face each other. So the front and the front of a cabinet. While on the back, you've got the back, and that's where all the hot air is coming out. And then on the other side, you've got another back of another cabinet facing all the hot air this way. And in those aisles, that's where they're going to be focusing and putting the right air conditioning and the right equipment in there to be able to suck all that hot air out and make sure that there's proper ventilation in that server rack. So what about power? Well, all of this equipment now needs to be powered somewhere. Now you could just do the standard thing and just plug in all the, the kettle cables, the power cables into the back of all the equipment, and then just run it into standard power boards and then running them into your power points in your home or in your small office, wherever it may be. But you've got to be aware of power. This equipment is sensitive. Now, if you're using old desktops, you're using old laptops, you may not be concerned about that. But if you're going to be using any sort of server equipment, you don't want that equipment to just be cut off like that and then potentially damaging the components. So you've got to be aware of power surges. So maybe, you may want to invest in better quality power boards. Now, in a proper server room, if you've ever worked in a company that is using standard crappy power boards, be aware, because that's not good. You do not go down your local hardware store and buy yourself a small $5 power board. You never do that in a server room. Those things are not built for this. What you'll find in real life environments is there's these things called PDUs, power distribution units. You can have power on the left and to the right. Equipment is going to be powered two ways. So for example, I've got some of my servers that we've looked at in an earlier video, rack servers. Well, they've got dual powers, left and right. It's not that it has dual powers just for the sake of having dual powers. Well, there are dual powers there for redundancy, so that two powers on one server, if one fails, the server does not fail. But secondly, those powers should be going into different power boards, one to the left, one to the right, so that if you have an outage on a power board or a PDU, then you don't lose access to that entire server. So you just got to consider that as well. So maybe you want to go and invest yourself in some better power units, some better PDUs, or some better power boards. You can use cheap power boards if you're using this just for learning purposes. I mean, look, I've done this and I haven't been concerned maybe with things going off and getting damaged, getting the power cutting out. That may be okay. But if you are going to be using it quite regularly and you want in your lab to be on all the time, invest in better power, getting yourself what's called a UPS or an uninterrupted power supply. This is equipment that you can also rack into a server rack, or you could just have it sitting next to your lab if you're not using a server rack. And that is going to be powering the equipment, but it's uninterrupted power. So it's a big unit with batteries inside of it. So all of your equipment runs into your UPS. The UPS is what's powering all the equipment, but then your UPS is then plugged into your main power points in whatever space you're hosting your home lab. So then if the mains power goes out, there's an outage or whatever, that UPS kicks in and then can still power that equipment for a certain amount of time. Different UPSs will be able to keep the lights on longer. The better the UPS, the more batteries the UPS is, the larger the UPS, you'll be able to keep the power on all of your equipment for longer. So just be aware of that. If you're looking at better power distribution, better power management, keeping your power on, maybe look at investing in a UPS if that's something that you want to consider. And then the last thing is your cabling. So we've looked at the power cabling, and you've also got Ethernet, right? You've got all of your devices that are going to be using Ethernet cabling. And with all of this Ethernet cabling and all of these power cables, well, they need to go somewhere. And the worst thing is having a home lab set up with cabling all over the place. So just consider your cable management. How are you going to cable all of this stuff together? Now, if you are looking at a rack, you can get proper cable management units, trays where you can actually feed the cables through. That would be really good. You don't have to do that. Even if you just use some Velcro or zip ties, just to make sure that all of your cables are fed accordingly, it just makes it look really, really neat. So do consider how you're gonna have all your cabling set up, because the more equipment that you've got inside of your home lab, the more cables you're gonna have and the more messy it could potentially get. Now, one more thing that I'll just mention very, very quickly is the power, the mains power that all of this equipment is going to be running into. If you're going to be running this in a home or in a small office, wherever it may be, does one single power point have enough juice to be able to power your entire home lab for long periods of time? Or will it short circuit and cause power to just be switched off at the switch box out on the road or wherever. So just consider that, because this equipment, if you're going to be housing a lot of stuff, needs a lot of juice. And again, we're talking about the corporate environment, sort of making a comparison between a home lab and a corporate. In a corporate environment, you've got a lot more juice coming into a server room, and you're not going to be powering everything into one single power point. There could be a set of different power points running on what's called different phases of electricity. In a home, you may not have that same luxury. So just be aware of that. You may want to be able to be spreading the load around. Maybe you're in a room that's got power on one side and then power on another. And maybe on the road, on the switch box, they're actually on different switches. Then that's good, because you can actually power maybe half of your lab in one and the other half in the other. So you don't have any risk of your power getting cut out or overwhelming the power inside of where the home lab is going to be built. You want to make sure that the whole unit is kept clean and neat. If I'm running a cable between a server and a switch, and I've got maybe multiple servers, multiple switches, then it can get very, very difficult to be able to track those cables later on should you need to make any sorts of changes. Now, of course, network cables, Ethernet cables, and Cat5, Cat6 cables, they're going to come in different colors and the different sorts of configurations at different lengths as well. Now, the colors really are irrelevant for the most part. Sometimes the color will actually mean something. Perhaps the cable is a straight through cable or a crossover cable, sorts of different configurations where the cables inside, the little wires inside, sort of cross over. But for the most part nowadays, it doesn't really matter too much. But what I generally recommend is at least find one color and try to stick to that color, regardless of what your peripherals, whatever the connections are to each other. But what you'll find generally in the corporate world, if you're sort of trying to mimic, I guess, a business, the corporate world, then sometimes you'll have uplink cables. So if you have a switch connecting to a switch, or a switch connecting to a router or to a firewall, that cable may be a different color because it actually shows that it's running to a specific networking device. Or perhaps all of the servers are running on one particular color, but all of the desktop computers at all the desks in an office, for example, are running on a different color. But because you're doing this in a home lab environment, it's completely optional, but I like to, as I said, keep it all clean, keep it all neat. So I try to stick to one particular color where possible, unless I don't have the cables. But look, at the end of the day, it's a home lab, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. So you pick the cables, the lengths that work for you. Now, on the length specifically, you don't want to go for really, really long cables unless you really need them. Try to find small enough cables that can easily connect between your devices. Now, with all of these cables, of course, you've got obviously Ethernet cables, but then you've got all of your power cables as well. And you've got even cables perhaps such as HDMI, VGA, DVI, which are going to be running into some sort of a display. If you're using a display like what I've got, how is the power going to be running? Is it running into specific left and right? You obviously want to make sure that all of this is kept neat and tidy. In a rack like this, you can actually get sort of rails or trays within the actual racks that actually allow you to feed the cables through and making it very, very easy. Cable ties are your friend, and Velcro will be your friend as well. And doing this in a home lab may seem like a bit of an overkill, but of course, if you're trying to do this because you're trying to mimic a real life environment, if you're doing this for your own learning, and then you want to put these good practices into practice in a business, then a business is going to appreciate your good housekeeping and making sure that all of your cables are neat and tidy. You want to make sure that you label those cables as well, because if you're going to have a whole stack of cables and you can't easily detect or trace where that cable is going, you may run into problems. It's just going to be a little inefficient because you have to run the cables and you've got to figure out where it's actually running into. But if you've actually got them labeled, if you actually label and say, from server A, you can say, port 1 on server A running to port 3 on this switch. A lot of people will go, and I've done this myself, will go and build their lab, be really, really happy with it, but don't even care about how they're tracing cables, and they just sort of shove everything in the back and just let it go as is. But then later on, you're going to upgrade something, or you want to change something around, or maybe a port on your switch is gone and you need to switch it over to another port, whatever it may be. You then need to go to the back of your rack, the back of wherever you're setting up your equipment, and there's just cables everywhere, and it's just going to cause you a lot of headaches. Are you going to be powering it on and leaving it on? Because at the end of the day, it is a home lab. So you've got to consider, do you want to be leaving the power on to your home lab all the time? Now, for me personally, because I'm using my home lab for two purposes, one being for my personal learning, and two being to actually provide some network functionality to my home network, I choose to leave parts of my HomeLab switched on and other parts of my HomeLab switched off. So in your scenario, you've got to think about that as well. Are you going to be leaving everything on all the time or not? Do what you need to do, build some servers, learn around some networking technologies, and then once you finish, you shut everything down. You could do that. You will, of course, need to consider that if you are going to be looking at investing in some good quality stuff, then that stuff can run quite hot, requiring a lot of electricity. So your power bills could go a little bit high. As I said, I like to have a bit of a hybrid where some is switched on, some equipment is switched off, but you can leave it on if you want to, or you can power it down. Consider the cabling, consider the labeling, consider the fan, the cooling, consider all of that stuff when you're designing and setting up your HomeLab. How to make the thing not look a spaghetti, right? You know, a bowl full of spaghetti, it's like, it's all over the place, it's jumbled like this. Subscribe, click on the button on the bell. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you on the next video.